All right, welcome to, I think it's part three of the feeding series. And we're going to talk about fruit eating birds. So, this is different than seed eating birds because seed eating birds are actually cracking open and destroying the seed, the genetic reproductive part of the plant. Fruit eating birds are eating the fruit that surrounds the seeds, but usually the seeds are passing through them undigested. And that means that those seeds then can go on and grow wherever they're dropped off by the bird. So a lot of plants have co-adapted to then use birds as a dispersal mechanism. Plants, it's plants. It's helpful for them if their seeds are dispersed to new areas, and so birds do that for them. And so a good example of this co-adaptation is this bird, I think it's from Australia, called the mistletoe bird. Mistletoe, you've seen, we all know mistletoe from Christmas, but mistletoe grows, is a real plant, and it grows, it's an epiphyte. So here's a picture of it in the tree over here. An epiphyte means that it grows up in another tree. So it's not parasitic necessarily, but it's growing on the branch of a tree. If you think about it, how is it going to be able to get its seeds? Seeds will just drop to the ground with gravity. And so it wants to be up in another tree somewhere. How's that going to happen? Well, it makes use of birds, and particularly the mistletoe bird eats the berries from the mistletoe. But the mistletoe has co-adapted so that it will use the bird to get to its new location. So what it does is that the outer coating of the berry comes off in the digestive tract, but the inside is very sticky, this part that's right around the seed, and it passes through the bird. But it's so sticky that when the bird poops it out, they it sticks to their backside, right? We'll talk about this later, but I'll just mention it here. Birds, remember we talked about them being more closely related to dinosaurs than they are to any other living animal. And they are much more like reptiles than like other mammals and things. And their digestive system, they have just one opening called a cloaca that everything passes through. So when these seeds come through and they're sticky, they stick right outside the opening of their cloaca on their backside. And so the bird doesn't really like this, and so it flies up to a branch somewhere and it starts rubbing its backside against the branch until this little seed comes off. And then the seed is where it needs to be on the branch of a tree where it can grow anew and be an epiphyte. So that's an interesting example of a co-adaptation, where a plant is really making use of a bird as a distribution mechanism. One more thing about fruit versus seeds. We talked about seeds being a really high nutrient, high energy food source. Fruit is not really that. Plants, they need to get as much dispersal of their genetic material as possible, so they make a lot of fruit, and they don't want to make the fruit really, it's expensive to make fruit that's really high energy, high nutrient. That takes a lot of effort. And so they make fruit to be tasty enough and just nutritious enough to attract birds, but not much more. So it's not the most high energy of food. So that means that birds that eat fruit have to eat a lot of it. And we can see this. For example, here's a bird called a cedar waxwing. Also, a relative of theirs called the Bohemian waxwing, which looks very similar, is also around in Vermont. And you can find them sometimes. Some trees will retain their sort of shriveled up little berries or crab apples or those sorts of things. And you will see just flocks of cedar waxwings just hanging out in the tree, eating and eating and eating and eating, because they have to spend a lot of their time eating. But it doesn't run away, right? So if you're an insect eater, which we'll talk about next, you got to chase them down, which is a big energy expenditure. Fruit-eating birds have to spend a lot of time feeding, and they also have to eat a lot of food. And again, Most fruit-eating birds will also eat other things. So cedar waxwings, for example, do eat insects, but then they will switch to berries in the wintertime, which makes a lot of sense because there's not a lot of insects that they can get. Okay, that's the end of fruit-eating birds.